Why did the bus fall silent the moment she stepped off? Maybe it was the limp. Maybe it was the way she gripped her duffel like it weighed more than her life. Or maybe it was because soldiers knew weakness when they saw it or thought they did. The air at Fort Jackson was heavy with dust, diesel fumes, and nervous sweat. Recruits filed out in a steady line, boots thudding on pavement, eyes darting, trying to look braver than they felt. Drill sergeant stood at the end of the line, hands clasped behind his back, his jaw set like granite. He'd been in the Army for 26 years, and in that time he claimed he could spot the ones who'd wash out before the first week ended. And then she appeared. Last one off the bus. She moved carefully, her gait uneven, deliberate, carrying the weight of both her bag and her body with stubborn control. Her limp wasn't subtle. Every step announced it. Every step gave the others something to whisper about. His eyes narrowed. His voice cracked like thunder across the formation. Move with purpose, recruit. Her knuckles whitened on the strap of her duffel. She didn't flinch, didn't look at him, just kept walking. Nobody offered help. Nobody wanted to be seen near her. By the time she joined the ranks, glances had already been exchanged, judgments already written. They hadn't even learned her name, but to them, she was broken. And broken parts don't last long in the machine. The morning blurred into a storm of paperwork, shouted orders, and the chaos of processing. Uniforms issued, medical checks, barracks assigned. Through it all, hovered like a hawk, circling, waiting for her to stumble. He found her during initial formation, stalking down the line of recruits like a predator testing the herd. Name, his voice was clipped. Yes, sir. His gaze dropped instantly to her leg, then back to her face. The military is a precision machine. It doesn't have time for broken parts. How long until you quit? Her eyes stayed forward, jaw locked. I will not be quitting, sir. Silence. He let the words hang there, daring her to break eye contact. Then he moved on, but his smirk told everyone what he thought. Later, when the barracks were being assigned, Squad Leader Rhodes, sharp-featured, ambitious, already jockeying for rank, looked up and down before tossing her a key. Bottom bunk by the latrine, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. So you don't have far to go when you quit. The snickers from nearby bunks stung worse than the words, but only nodded, collected her gear, and took her assigned place. That night after lights out, she unwrapped the compression bandage from her leg in silence. Scars caught the faint moonlight, deep, ragged lines, surgical repairs that told a story nobody else knew. She traced them with careful fingers, not in shame but in ritual, massaging aching muscles until the fire in her nerves dulled. Then she pulled a worn photograph from her footlocker. Its edges were frayed, the surface creased from years of handling. Her father's face stared back at her, strong, steady, with a smile he never wore in uniform. And beside him, a little girl, 8 years old, standing proudly in his shadow. She stared at that picture until the room blurred, then tucked it beneath her pillow and lay back, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Across the bay, a muffled sob broke the silence. Private, youngest in the platoon, was struggling again. Her bunk had failed inspection 3 times already, and one more mistake meant punishment for everyone. Rose quietly crossed the floor without a word and began tucking the sheets with calm, precise hands. She didn't explain. She didn't lecture. She simply showed how it was done, step by step, until the corners held sharp as blades. Minutes later, Drill Sergeant burst in for a surprise inspection. Passed, for the first time. When stormed out, barking at the others, was already back in her bunk. Eyes closed, invisible once more. But invisible never lasts long. The days that followed sharpened into a rhythm of cruelty. Each morning seemed to find new ways to spotlight her limp. Each evening, Rhodes made sure she knew she was dragging everyone else down. Every mistake was pinned on her, every doubt fueled at her expense. But what no one saw were the hours before dawn. While others slept, Rose at 4:15, 45 minutes before reveille, stretching, strengthening. running through exercises she had refined through years of painful rehabilitation. No one saw the custom insoles she carved into her boots, or the hidden reinforcements she stitched into her uniform seams to handle stress where her body couldn't. No one knew the war she fought in silence, every single day, just to stand among them. By week 3, the humiliation peaked on the obstacle course. Drill sergeant singled her out, made her repeat the wall climb 6 times in front of everyone. Her arms shook. Her breath came harsh. But her face stayed composed. "If you can't pull your weight," shouted, "you endanger everyone around you. Is that what you want? To get real soldiers killed because of your weakness?" She said nothing, not a word, just reset her stance, found a new grip, and tried again. When the others collapsed into bunks that night, she slipped out to the training field alone. Over and over she practiced. Not the way the manual said, not the way the instructors demanded, her way, modified, adjusted, techniques carved out of pain, tested against failure. On the 23rd night, she wasn't alone. Medic Lori leaned against the supply shed, arms crossed, watching as she shifted her weight in unfamiliar push-ups, redistributing stress away from her bad side. His eyes, sharp and trained, recognized something others didn't. "Your form is good," he said quietly. Froze, then snapped to attention. "Sir, I have permission for additional PT." "At ease," Lori replied, stepping closer. "I'm not here to report you." His eyes flicked to her leg. "Old injury or birth defect?" "Injury, sir." "Combat." The silence was enough of an answer. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded and walked away. The next morning, she found a folded note tucked into her boot. "Try anchoring your affected side against a fixed point during rifle stabilization. Compensates for micro tremors." It was the first of many. Anonymous tips, small technical advantages, respect without pity, guidance without spotlight. And still, the platoon leader, Daniels, made her his personal project. Daniels, the golden boy, tall, athletic, son of a decorated officer, grandson of another. To him, she was an insult to the uniform. "You're taking a spot from someone whole," he hissed during a water break. "Someone who could actually serve." She didn't reply, didn't give him the satisfaction, but the words burrowed deep. By week 8, the pressure mounted. Evaluations loomed. Commanding officers reviewed files. Numbers didn't lie, and hers painted a bleak picture: bottom quartile in speed, endurance, obstacle completion. Drill sergeant recommended medical discharge. Captain looked her in the eye and offered a clean exit. "With an honorable discharge now, your record remains clean. You could serve in civilian support roles, logistics, administration. You don't have to prove anything here." Her voice didn't tremble. "With respect, sir, I belong here more than most." "And why is that private?" "Because I've already proven I can keep going under conditions others never had to face." The captain studied her, unreadable, then dismissed her without comment. That night sat alone in the barracks long after lights out. She unwrapped her bandage again, staring at the scars until her vision blurred. She thought of her father, thought of the explosion, thought of the day she should have died. They thought she was broken, they thought she was finished. But she had something she hadn't told them. Not yet. And when the time came, it would change everything. What happens when the terrain itself becomes your enemy? For most recruits, it meant failure. For her, it meant something else entirely. The 10th week began with a night march. The sky was moonless, the ground deliberately flooded, and the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. Recruits stumbled through the mud, slipping, cursing under their breath. Every hidden hole was a trap waiting to twist an ankle. Every uneven slope tested balance. And somehow, the one everyone expected to collapse was the one moving with the most control. Her gait, that uneven, awkward stride mocked by her peers, it gave her stability where others lost theirs. Years of compensating for a ruined leg had taught her to read the ground, to anticipate the shift of weight before it happened. When Private cried out in the dark, falling to her knees was already there. No spotlight, no fanfare, just a quiet hand on shoulder. Shift your weight here, distribute, don't fight it, flow with it. Rose, hobbling but steady, keeping pace without drawing attention. And from the rear of the column, Medic Lowry watched. Something in his expression hardened that night. When he returned to his quarters, he pulled personnel file. Most of it was ordinary, medical notes, training scores, but then redactions. Sections blacked out, access restricted beyond his clearance. Unusual for a standard recruit, very unusual. Meanwhile, Daniels grew more restless. His frustration, once whispered, was now venom in plain sight. He cornered her the night before their packs were due for inspection. "You think you're proving something?" His jaw clenched as he shoved a hand against the wall beside her. "You're not a soldier, you're dead weight wrapped in arrogance. Tomorrow's Valor Ridge. You won't make it to mile 2, and when you collapse, someone else will have to carry you. That's not courage, that's selfishness." Her hands moved steadily across her gear, checking straps, adjusting weight, ignoring his words like distant static. Only when he finally spat, "Do us all a favor and report to medical before the start," did she look up. Her eyes, calm, unwavering, locked on his. "No one will carry me, Daniels. Not now, not ever." He sneered, but for the first time, something unsettled flickered in his face. Valor Ridge. A name whispered like a curse. 15 miles of brutality, steep inclines, tactical challenges, obstacles designed to strip recruits to their marrow. Success meant graduation. Failure meant recycling or discharge, and for some, it meant the end of the dream. Pre-dawn, the platoon assembled at the base of the ridge. Their breath turned to mist in the cold air, mixing with nerves too thick to ignore. Instructors stood at the checkpoints, binoculars ready, waiting for collapse, waiting for cracks. Paced before them, his voice hard as the frozen ground. "This course breaks people, not just bodies, minds. You'll reach points where every cell in you screams stop, and only your mind will decide whether you listen. Some of you," his eyes landed on her, "might want to consider your limitations before you start." No one spoke, but a smirk passed between Daniels and Rhodes, a quiet consensus. This was the day the limp finally lost. The first 6 miles were predictable. Daniels took the lead, pounding forward with raw athleticism, the stronger recruits clustering behind him. Fell to the rear, always the rear. Her gait, unmistakable, visible to every instructor scanning from the checkpoints. "Already struggling," muttered. "Should we have medical ready?" Frowned, let her fail on her own terms. She's made it this far. But failure didn't come. At mile 7, the ground shifted. Flat terrain gave way to jagged slopes, unstable and treacherous. Recruits who had sprinted too hard early faltered, their balance faltering on loose stone. And suddenly, the limp that had marked her as defective became her weapon. Her stride, uneven, calculated, gave her purchase where they slipped. She moved steadily, deliberately, passing one exhausted body after another. No gloating, no smile, just breath-controlled, eyes locked forward. By mile 9, she was no longer at the back. She was mid-pack, and disbelief began to spread. At mile 11, something unusual happened. A helicopter touched down near the highest checkpoint. Commander Hayes stepped out, the senior training officer at Fort Jackson. His presence for a standard assessment was rare. His eyes tracked her, waiting, measuring. Daniels noticed her now. His rhythm faltered as he saw her close the gap, his disbelief raw, almost desperate. At mile 12 came the wall. A 60-degree incline, loose shale, a climb that chewed up hands and spat out souls. Daniels had dropped back, lungs heaving. She was behind him now, and he could hear her steps, steady, relentless. He turned, sweat streaking his dirt-covered face. "How the hell are you?" "On your left," she said quietly. Panic flickered. He shifted sideways, blocking her path. not happening. But the ridge didn't care for ego. His boots slipped on loose stone. His body lurched backward, seconds from a fall that would have sent him tumbling down the slope. Her hands shot out, grip iron tight, muscles screaming. She steadied him just long enough for him to find footing. Their eyes met, his wide with shock, hers calm with something deeper. Then she released him and without a word continued past. For the first time the platoon saw her leg in full. The pants had ridden up, revealing scars, long, brutal, surgical. Not a limp born of weakness, a limp born of survival. She crested the ridge 3 minutes ahead of the next recruit, breathing steady, face composed, alone at the finish. The others stumbled in behind her, collapsing, heaving, some in tears. She stood, waiting, silent. And that was when Commander Hayes stepped forward, his voice carried with the weight of revelation. "Captain." Every head snapped up. Confusion rippled through the exhausted ranks, blinked hard. "Sir, this is private." Hayes shook his head. "This is Captain, Special Forces qualified, temporarily demoted for this training cycle, daughter of Commander James, Medal of Honor recipient." The silence broke like glass, murmurs, gasps, disbelief, and for Daniels a hollow echo, broken no more. Hayes's voice lowered, but every recruit heard it. "She was at Kandahar, same blast that killed her father, took shrapnel to her femoral artery and pelvis. Doctors said she'd never walk again, and yet here she is, not asking for special treatment, not demanding respect, just proving step by step, mile by mile, that adaptability is survival." His face hardened with realization. The notes, the silence, the scars, all of it made sense. And for the first time since her arrival, spoke not to survive, but to define herself. Soldiers don't all break the same way. Someone needed to prove recovery isn't just possible, it's an advantage. Her eyes swept over Daniels, Rhodes, every doubter. "I never wanted special treatment because of my father or because of my leg. I only wanted the chance to earn my place." No one moved, no one spoke. In that silence she had already won. How do you stand tall when every scar wants to pull you down? At graduation she did, limp and all. 3 weeks after Valor Ridge stood at attention as her name was called. Private no longer. Her uniform carried honors now, though her body still bore the limp that had defined her in the eyes of everyone who doubted her. When she crossed the stage, applause filled the hall. Yet her face remained calm, reserved, because she knew the applause wasn't for what she had done, but for what they had finally seen. Squad leader Rhodes approached her after the ceremony, arrogance drained from her voice, replaced by something harder to name: respect. "I don't know how to apologize," she said quietly. "You don't need to," replied, cutting her off gently. "You treated me like I wanted to be treated, like any other soldier who had to prove herself." Later Daniels found her, his hand extended, stiff, reluctant but genuine. "That day on the ridge," his voice cracked, "you could have let me fall." Her answer was simple: "That's not what teammates do." For a moment silence stretched between them. Then he nodded, his arrogance dimmed, not erased but reshaped. And then there was Medic Lowry. He found her in the quiet afterward, away from the others, a strange weight in his eyes. "I knew who you were from the beginning," he confessed. "Your father saved my brother in Kandahar. I wanted to see if you had his heart." His lips curved, soft. "You have more." The words pierced deeper than any metal. But the true turning point came not on the parade field, but weeks later, when orders arrived. She was to lead a new assignment, a specialized training unit for soldiers recovering from combat injuries, some with prosthetics, some with trauma, some with scars no one could see. When she walked across the training field for the first time, every eye turned toward her limp. But this time it wasn't doubt, it was hope. "Attention," the formation leader barked. She moved to the front. Their faces told the story before any file did: broken bodies, shaken minds, restless uncertainty. Men and women who had been written off, who'd been told their best days were behind them. "At ease," she said. Her voice carried a steadiness the recruits didn't yet believe in. "My name is Captain, and I'm here to show you that your greatest challenge can become your greatest advantage." Silence stretched, some skeptical, some hopeful, some too tired to care. She began walking the line, her limp pronounced but purposeful. "6 months ago I stood where you stand now, except no one knew my history. All they saw was my limp. They called me broken. They placed bets on when I'd quit." Her gaze lingered on one man, a former linebacker with a prosthetic leg. His jaw was set, his arms folded. "Private," he spoke bluntly, the way athletes do. "With respect, ma'am, how do we know you're not just another officer checking a box, proving to command you can handle the damaged goods assignment?" A few recruits stiffened, waiting for reprimand. Instead, lips curved faintly. "Fair question." She gestured toward the obstacle course. "How about I show you?" The next hour rewrote skepticism into possibility. She demonstrated modified drills, showing how to turn limitation into leverage. For she showed how to channel raw upper body strength where legs couldn't. For who struggled with balance after a brain injury, she adjusted stances, teaching her to anchor through awareness, not speed. Every adaptation wasn't from a manual. It came from lived experience, from failure, from nights of rebuilding alone. By the end of the session, sweat streaked their faces, doubt loosened its grip. But still, one recruit stood silent at the back, Private Winter, her scars invisible, her eyes scanning exits, her posture coiled, never at ease. After dismissal, found her, "Walk with me." They moved through dusk, the base quiet. Finally said, "Combat stress injury is not less real because it can't be seen." Winter stiffened. "I never said." "You didn't have to," interrupted gently. "I recognize the signs, hypervigilance, positioning by walls, watching exits. Kandahar left me with more than a limp." Winter's throat tightened. "How do you make it stop, the feeling that something about to go wrong?" "It doesn't stop entirely," admitted, "but you learn to channel it, that awareness, it becomes an asset." For the first time, Winter's gaze lifted from the ground, searching, measuring. "Give them time," said, "and give yourself time too." Over the weeks, something shifted. A group that had arrived broken, defeated, began to forge itself into a team. Rumors spread across the base about Captain Limpy, a nickname born in insult, reclaimed with pride. Her unit began to carry it like a banner. But not everyone believed. 6 weeks in, Colonel Reeves ordered a demonstration, in front of Pentagon officials, against a conventional platoon. The night before, Lowry found her in her office, his words blunt. "They're setting you up. Reeves never wanted this program. He wants to prove you're wasting resources." Kept arranging papers, her tone calm. "That's his prerogative." Lowry leaned forward. "The opposing platoon is current group. They've been training specifically to counter your methods. He wants you to fail publicly. Hard." She paused, looked up, her eyes unreadable. "Then tomorrow will be educational." Morning brought a circus atmosphere, bleachers filled with observers, Pentagon staffers, Reeves, his voice laced with condescension, addressing the crowd. "Today, we witness an experiment. Captain believes soldiers with limitations can still serve effectively in combat. Personally, I believe our standards exist for a reason, but perhaps I'll be proven wrong." Murmurs rippled, cameras rolled. Every recruit in her unit shifted uneasily, muttered, "They're watching us like lab rats." "They are," said calm as steel, "so show them the results." The whistle blew. The conventional platoon surged ahead, coordinated, efficient, textbook perfect. Her unit moved slower, deliberate, conserving. On rough terrain, soldiers powered through, but's unit adapted, steady as a tide. By the problem-solving stations, the gap narrowed. Winter stepped forward, hypervigilance tuned into razor awareness, spotting patterns faster than anyone else. ripped through obstacles with sheer upper body might. Piece by piece, doubt unraveled. And then came the final test, combat simulation. The conventional platoon executed doctrine flawlessly, aggressive maneuvers, overwhelming force, but's unit had trained differently. They funneled opponents into zones, conserved energy, relied on communication and patience. Minutes turned into 40. The shift became undeniable. Splatoon bled strength. Unit, scar-limbed, soul held. When the whistle ended the exercise, the results were stark. 4 out of 5 objectives secured. Losses minimal. Efficiency undeniable. Reeves's face was stone. The Pentagon observers leaned forward, and one general, ribbons heavy across his chest, approached her directly. "Impressive," he said. "Adaptation of doctrine, tactical flexibility. What did you apply from your own experience, Captain?" Her gaze didn't waver. "That limitations force innovation, sir, and innovation wins battles strength alone cannot." The silence that followed wasn't weakness, it was power. What happens when victory is undeniable, but still unwanted? Sometimes it breeds enemies more dangerous than failure ever could. The demonstration's results were impossible to dismiss. Reeves had set the stage for humiliation, but instead he was the one left searching for excuses. The observers, generals hardened by decades of combat, officials trained to see numbers and outcomes, had seen something they couldn't unsee. A platoon of so-called broken soldiers outmaneuvered, outlasted, and outthought a conventional unit. Within a week, orders arrived from Washington. The experiment would not only continue, it would expand. Funding approved, additional recruits selected, a training doctrine to be written and distributed. Captain was no longer an oddity to be dismissed. She was a case study to be watched. Her unit, once whispered about as damaged goods, now drew volunteers. Soldiers who had been sidelined by injuries told they were liabilities came knocking at her door. Some limped, some carried prosthetics, some carried wounds no doctor's scalpel could find. They came because they had heard the same whisper she had: "You don't belong anymore." And she had proven those whispers wrong. But attention is a double-edged weapon. For every ally, an enemy sharpened their doubts, and in that crowd stood one voice louder, harder, more immovable than the rest. General Harmon. He was old guard to the bone, 40 years in uniform, believer in raw numbers, speed, power, kill ratios. To him, war was attrition measured in muscle and steel. Injured soldiers, they were a liability to be honored then dismissed, not reforged, not rearmed. When he heard whispers of adaptive combat doctrine, he called it an insult to the profession, a distraction, a dangerous lowering of standards. And yet her results spread. Graduation rates climbed. Field simulations proved stronger. Most startling of all, combat data from trial deployments suggested program graduates often outperformed unbroken units when conditions turned chaotic. Where textbook-trained soldiers faltered, hers adapted. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Superior adaptation wins where superior force fails. But Harmon was not her father. Harmon was the embodiment of the wall she'd been slamming against since day one. Even nearing retirement, returned to her office one afternoon. He stood stiff as if parade rest had been carved into his bones. "Captain," he said formally. She gestured toward a chair. "This is a surprise, Sergeant." He sat, posture rigid, discomfort written in every line. "I'm being assigned to your program for my final tour. Seemed appropriate to introduce myself properly this time." The irony bit deep. Their first meeting had ended with his sneer: "Broken parts don't belong." "We can use your experience," she said diplomatically. "That's not why I'm here," he admitted. His eyes dropped for the first time. "I owe you something, and I was wrong not just about you, about what makes a soldier." Her chest tightened. This was the man who had looked at her limp and seen only weakness. the man whose voice had carried her humiliation across every formation. "The military evolves," she said softly. "All of us learn." "Some more slowly than others," he admitted. His eyes, lined with years, lifted to hers. "I spent 30 years believing only one path made soldiers. You proved otherwise. And I wonder now how many I misjudged, how many I discarded because they didn't fit my narrow definition." Silence hung heavy. Then she said, "Then maybe your final tour is about answering that question." His jaw tightened. Then slowly he nodded. "It would be a privilege to serve under your command." As he left, his words lingered. "The day you outpaced them all on Valor Ridge, I realized I didn't understand strength the way I thought I did. I'm still learning." That night walked the training grounds alone. Her limp ached more than usual. Storms always did that. The air felt heavy, barometric pressure dropping like a warning. She moved through the quiet fields where her recruits, her soldiers, would stand the next day. A habit she'd kept since basic. Before every turning point, she walked the ground, felt it under her boots, measured herself against it. "Captain," the voice came from behind. "Specialist," one of the trainees. His balance was fragile from a brain injury, his steps careful but determined. "You should be resting," she told him. "That's why I came," he said, falling in beside her. "I heard General Harmon will be observing tomorrow." Her stomach tightened. She hadn't told them, not yet. "He was my former commander," continued. "When I was injured, he visited me in the hospital, told me I had served honorably, told me I should accept discharge with dignity instead of fighting to stay. He thought he was being kind." His throat burned. This wasn't policy anymore. This was personal. Harmon's presence wasn't about evaluation. It was about erasure. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we show him what he couldn't see." The delegation arrived with precision only Washington can conjure. Black cars, crisp uniforms, polished medals. Secretary Dawson led the group, flanked by Generals Harmon, and behind them trailed aides with tablets, ready to record every flaw. Harmon's handshake was cold, perfunctory. His eyes swept the training grounds like a judge at a trial he'd already decided. The morning sessions went flawlessly. Instructors demonstrated protocols for amputees, for traumatic brain injuries, for stress injuries. Graduates showed their progress. Winter, once trembling and silent, now led exercises with a voice sharp as steel. His prosthetic leg gleaming with the insignia of the unit barked cadence with confidence. The data briefing followed. Charts, metrics, comparisons. His voice calm, deliberate. Yes, her soldiers scored lower in raw sprint speed. Yes, their lift numbers were lower. But in tactical problem-solving, in endurance under pressure, in operational adaptability, they outperformed. "We're not creating soldiers who succeed despite injury," she said, voice steady. "We're developing soldiers who succeed because their injuries force them to adapt." Secretary Dawson nodded, thoughtful, scribbled notes, leaned forward, intrigued. Harmon leaned back, stone-faced. When she finished, he finally spoke, his voice cut sharp. "Impressive numbers, Captain, but combat isn't fought with spreadsheets. I'll be interested to see how your people handle real pressure." Her answer was calm. "That's precisely what this afternoon will show." Lunch came. As the delegation moved through the dining facility, Secretary Dawson slowed beside her. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Your father and I served together in Desert Storm," he said. "He always saw what others missed. He'd recognize what you're building here. Not just training, a different way of thinking about soldiers." Her throat tightened. He rarely spoke of her father. To hear his name spoken now with reverence was a knife turned into a lifeline. And still the storm gathered. That afternoon the bleachers filled again. This time it was Reeves waiting to see her fail. It was Harmon, the man who had told he was finished. The man who saw her unit not as soldiers, but as proof that the army was softening. The scenario was set, 2 units, One objective, limited resources, shifting conditions. The whistle was about to blow. And it wasn't just another test. It was war against an idea older than herself. The idea that broken meant finished. What happens when the rules change in the middle of the fight? That was the question her unit lived for, and the test that would decide if they had any future at all. The field was set like a stage, 2 platoons, one objective. On the left, a conventional unit, polished, textbook perfect, commanded by, his scowl as sharp as ever. On the right, soldiers, limping, sleepless, some stitched together with metal, others carrying invisible fractures no surgeon could mend. Observers filled the bleachers, generals, aides, the Secretary of Defense himself. Harmon sat stiffly, arms folded, his jaw set in stone. The whistle cut the air. The conventional platoon moved fast, aggressive, overwhelming obstacles with sheer speed and force. Their formations snapped like clockwork, weapons raised, tactics drilled 1,000 times. Textbook. Impressive. Unit started differently, slower, cautious. Some observers frowned. Harmon smirked. "They're hesitant," he muttered to Dawson. "You can't hesitate in combat." But they weren't hesitating. They were conserving, reading, preparing. 20 minutes in, the scenario shifted. Pre-planned chaos. Key routes suddenly blocked. Communications disrupted. Simulated casualties thrown in. The kind of curveball combat always throws when doctrine runs out. The conventional unit faltered. Their speed became their enemy. Resources already burned, momentum lost, discipline stretched thin. Soldiers adapted. Winter, whose hypervigilance once left her sleepless, now used it to scan for patterns the others missed. She spotted a hidden route before anyone else. His prosthetic leg pounding the dirt, hauled a comrade over a wall using strength no training manual accounted for. Adjusted her balance, guiding others across uneven ground. Her once disabling dizziness turned into instinctual awareness of terrain. Every weakness had become a weapon. His voice carried low but firm across the comms. Layered defenses, don't chase, let them come to you. Her unit held, funneled enemies into kill zones, communicated in whispers and signals, a web of cohesion that didn't need speed to survive. They didn't just adapt to obstacles, they expected them. By the 40-minute mark, the shift was undeniable. Soldiers, textbook trained, were bleeding strength. Written off as damaged, still held 4 of 5 objectives. The whistle blew. Silence followed, then murmurs, then the sound of aides scribbling furiously. The score was clear. His unit had won. She stood calm, chest rising steady, eyes on her soldiers. Pride burned low in her chest, controlled but unshakable. And then Harmon stood. His voice boomed across the field. "Impressive demonstration," he admitted, his tone sharp enough to cut. "But tell me this, Captain, how would these adaptations hold under sustained combat? Ingenuity has limits. Eventually, the brutal reality of deployment strips clever tricks bare. What then?" The words landed heavy. A trap. If she faltered now, everything could be dismissed as luck, as gimmickry. Before could answer, another voice broke in. "Permission to speak, sir." Specialist stepped forward. His movements were careful, his balance still fragile, but his eyes steady. Harmon's gaze snapped to him. Recognition flashed. The last time they had spoken had been in a hospital room. Harmon had told him his career was over, that he should accept discharge with dignity, that he was finished. "Granted," Harmon said stiffly. His voice carried, clear and measured. "General, when you visited me at Walter Reed, you told me my combat days were done, that I should walk away. With respect, sir, you were half right. I did need to find a new path, but not away from combat readiness, toward it. I just needed to learn how my injury could become an advantage." He gestured to his teammates. "Every person here has done the same. We don't succeed by pretending we're uninjured. We succeed by transforming how we fight because of our injuries." A ripple went through the crowd. Even Harmon's stone face flickered. Secretary Dawson leaned forward, his voice low, thoughtful. The most dangerous opponent is often the one who's already had to fight just to stand on the battlefield. They've proven resilience before the first shot is fired. The words sank deep into the air, nodded slowly, scribbled harder, and Harmon stared at as if seeing him for the first time. Stepped forward then, her voice calm, her limp unhidden. You asked what happens under sustained combat, General. The answer is simple. Adaptation doesn't run out, it deepens. Every time they're challenged, they grow sharper, stronger, more capable of fighting the fight others aren't ready for. That's not temporary ingenuity. That's permanent resilience. Her eyes locked on his. You call it broken, I call it tactical evolution. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then applause began, quiet at first, then louder, rolling across the bleachers until even Scowl cracked. Harmon remained still, arms crossed, but in his eyes was something new, not agreement, not yet, but recognition. The demonstration ended, the delegation filed away, but the seed had been planted. That night walked the grounds again, the storm finally breaking above, rain soaking the dirt into mud. She stopped at the memorial wall, newly erected, her father's name etched into stone alongside others lost in Kandahar. Her hand pressed against his name. They called me broken on day one, she whispered, but now they know better. The rain ran down her face, indistinguishable from tears. And somewhere in the darkness, she allowed herself one truth. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to every soldier who'd been told they were finished. And the war against that word, broken, had only just begun. What happens when the experiment becomes the standard? That was the question none of them expected to face so soon. Within weeks of the demonstration, orders rolled in like a flood. Funding doubled. New recruits approved. 3 additional bases ordered to establish similar programs. What began as a trial had been rewritten as doctrine in progress. For it meant endless nights, briefings, reports, designing an adaptive tactics manual from scratch. For the first time, the Army wasn't just tolerating her methods, it was asking her to teach them. But growth brings exposure, and exposure brings scrutiny. Word spread through the ranks. Some officers scoffed, others grew curious. Slowly, a cultural fault line appeared, the old guard clinging to tradition, the younger soldiers whispering about adaptation as the future. And in the middle of it all stood. One evening, she sat at her desk, sifting through new applications. Her limp throbbed with the ache of too many hours on her feet, paperwork blurred in front of her eyes. A knock sounded at the door. Enter, she said. Daniel stepped inside, no longer the arrogant recruit sneering at her limp. His uniform bore the insignia of a platoon leader now. His posture held less swagger, more weight. Captain, he said, stiff at first, then looser, I'm requesting assignment to your program. The silence between them was heavy. She leaned back. Why? His jaw tightened. Because I want to learn what I should seen from the start. You were right on Valor Ridge. I was blind. I don't want to stay that way. Her eyes searched his face. She remembered the venom in his voice, the way he'd told her to quit before she dragged them down. And she remembered her hands saving him from falling, steadying him when his own strength failed. Request approved, she said finally. His relief was visible though restrained. Thank you, ma'am. When he left, she sat in silence for a long moment, because forgiveness is never clean, but sometimes it is necessary. Daniels joined the instructors the following week. His transition was uneasy at first, recruits remembered his disdain, but gradually his humility began to show. He listened more than he spoke. He drilled harder than he needed to, and when he addressed the unit, his words carried weight. Strength without humility is just ego, he told them one morning. Captain taught me that the hard way. The recruits listened, believed him, because if even Daniels could be remade, maybe they could too. Meanwhile, the culture around them began to shift. Captain Limpy, once a sneer, spread across the base as a badge of honor. Other units, skeptical at first, began asking for joint drills. Traditional soldiers found themselves outpaced in problem-solving scenarios, forced to confront that maybe, just maybe, resilience mattered as much as raw speed. But with growth came resistance. Colonel Reeves, still smarting from his public defeat, worked quietly behind the scenes to limit her influence. Funding delays, administrative roadblocks, whisper campaigns painting her as a media darling rather than a soldier. And above him loomed Harmon, the old guard's anchor. He hadn't spoken to her since the demonstration, but his silence was not surrender. It was the pause before a new assault. Felt it in her bones, pressure mounting, the storm not over, just circling. Yet amid that tension, something remarkable unfolded. Her soldiers transformed. Winter, once trembling, now led PTSD training for others. Her hypervigilance, once called paranoia, was reshaped into strategic foresight. She became their specialist for combat stress, the one others turned to when invisible wounds cut deepest. Prosthetic leg gleaming took on advanced mobility training. He showed others how to scale walls, haul gear, and fight with strength drawn from the upper body. His prosthetic bore a new insignia, a phoenix rising, forged through fire. Once stumbling from dizziness, became their terrain expert. She could read ground conditions with uncanny precision, predicting slips and collapses before they happened. What had once been a liability became tactical instinct. And Daniels became her unexpected ally. He pushed recruits hard, demanded discipline, but now his tone was different, sharpened not by arrogance but by belief. One afternoon, during a brutal drill in the summer heat, collapsed to one knee, his breath ragged. Daniels was there instantly, hauling him up. "You're not done yet," he barked, but softer than it sounded. "We don't leave our own on the ground." Watched from the tower above, her chest tightening, not with pride alone, but with something like healing. Still, she knew what was coming. The Pentagon wasn't just interested, it was circling. A full delegation scheduled to arrive. Secretary Dawson again, generals and Harmon, always Harmon. This time the stakes were higher. If her program impressed, expansion across all branches could follow. If it faltered, the backlash could crush it. The night before their arrival, she found herself walking the memorial wall again, her father's name etched deep, her reflection blurred in the stone. Lowry found her there, raincoat over his shoulders, eyes soft. "Transport's ready whenever you are, Captain." She didn't move. It's strange, to build something that began so personal and now it belongs to the Army. "You're not leaving it behind," Lowry said. "You're making sure it lasts. Different mission, same purpose." Her fingers traced her father's name. His words whispered in memory. The most important battles aren't won with superior force, but with superior adaptation. She hadn't understood then. Not until she rebuilt herself from the ground up. Not until she saw broken soldiers become warriors again. Now she lived it. The next morning the cars rolled in. Crisp uniforms, cold salutes, eyes watching for cracks. And as Harmon stepped onto the field, his gaze cut across her unit like a blade. The test wasn't over, it had only just begun. How do you prove something no one wants to believe? Not with words, with action, always action. The morning of the Pentagon's visit began with precision. Vehicles lined the road, polished black, engines idling. Staffers stepped out with tablets in hand, uniforms crisp, expressions sharper than blades. Secretary Dawson led the group, calm but watchful. General curious. General scribbling already. And General Harmon, the immovable stone, jaw clenched, gaze like judgment carved into granite, stood at attention as they approached. Her limp, visible and undeniable, matched with a posture as straight as any soldier's. She saluted, her eyes steady. Captain Dawson greeted, voice measured. "Sir." The first half of the day unfolded under watchful eyes. Her instructors demonstrated protocols for different injuries, balanced drills for brain trauma, modified obstacle climbs for amputees, stress inoculation training for those by combat memories. The generals watched, some intrigued, some skeptical. Harmon never moved his arms from their folded position. By noon, they gathered in the briefing room, presented her data, performance metrics, survival rates in simulations, retention compared to conventional units. The numbers didn't lie. Where her people fell short in raw power, they surpassed in adaptability, tactical problem-solving, and operational endurance. "We are not creating soldiers who succeed despite their injuries," she said, her voice calm. "We are creating soldiers who succeed because of them. Every limitation forces innovation, and innovation is what wins when doctrine fails." Dawson nodded, thoughtful, asked sharp questions, took more notes. Harmon sat back unimpressed. When she finished, his voice cut the air. "Impressive statistics, Captain, but combat isn't fought on spreadsheets. I want to see how your soldiers perform under real pressure." Met his gaze steady. "You will this afternoon, General." The field was prepared, bleachers full again, observers leaning forward. 2 units, one conventional, one hers, faced a complex scenario: secure a high-value objective, navigate shifting terrain, dwindling supplies, and simulated casualties. No straight path, no easy choices. The whistle blew. The conventional unit surged, efficient and fast. They took early ground with precision, overwhelming obstacles through force. Their progress was clean, textbook. Unit advanced differently, deliberate, slower. Harmon's smirk was visible even from the stands. "They're hesitant," he muttered. "In combat, hesitation kills." But it wasn't hesitation. It was calculation, conservation, preparation. 20 minutes in, the scenario shifted. Pre-planned disruptions rippled across the field. Key routes blocked. Communications jammed. Random medical emergencies introduced. The conventional unit faltered. Their momentum stalled. Discipline cracked as leaders scrambled to adjust. Soldiers moved like water. Where paths closed, they carved new ones. Where communication broke, hand signals filled the gaps. Where injuries were simulated, adaptations kicked in. Winter using her hypervigilance to spot hidden routes, anchoring ropes with upper body strength, guiding others across unstable ground with terrain sense no manual could teach. From the observation platform, spoke softly to the generals. "Conventional doctrine teaches disruption is an anomaly. My unit trains to expect it, to embrace it, to adapt before others even register the change." They watched as her soldiers bypassed obstacles entirely, conserving strength where the conventional platoon wasted it. By the 40-minute mark, the difference was undeniable. The conventional unit had forced half their objective with heavy simulated casualties, had secured nearly all with minimal loss. The whistle ended the exercise. Silence, then murmurs, aides typing furiously, Dawson leaning forward, nodding, scribbling faster than ever. And Harmon, his smirk gone, his jaw tight. He rose, his voice carrying across the field. "Impressive, but ingenuity has limits. In sustained combat, clever tricks break down. When the battlefield grinds on for days, when fatigue strips precision, when chaos compounds, what then? Can they endure?" The question struck heavy, a challenge wrapped in steel. Before could respond, movement stirred at the edge of the formation. Specialist stepped forward, his balance still imperfect, his body still carrying the weight of brain trauma, but his voice steady. "Permission to speak, sir." Harmon blinked, recognizing him. The last time they'd spoken was in a hospital bed, written off as finished. "Granted," Harmon said tightly. His voice rang across the field. "General, you told me my combat days were over, that I should accept reality, that I should leave the fight to others. You believed you were being kind." His gaze swept the formation, then returned to Harmon. "With respect, sir, you were half right. I did need a new path, but not away from service, toward a different kind. This program gave me that path, not by pretending I was whole, by showing me how to fight with what I had left." The silence was electric. Soldiers held their breath. Generals froze in place. His voice did not falter. "We don't succeed despite our scars. We succeed because of them. Every adaptation makes us harder to break. Every failure we've lived through becomes training. That doesn't wear out in sustained combat. It deepens. That's what endurance really is." Secretary Dawson's voice cut in, low but heavy with weight. "The most dangerous opponent is often the one who has already fought to stand on the battlefield. They have already proven resilience before the first shot is fired." Nodded, wrote faster. Even Reeves, standing off to the side, shifted uneasily. Harmon said nothing, his eyes fixed on, for the first time, not with dismissal but with something harder, recognition. Stepped forward then, calm, steady, limp unhidden. "You ask what happens under sustained combat, General. The answer is this: resilience doesn't fade, it compounds. Every battle we fight sharpens the edge. That's not weakness, that's evolution." The field was silent. Then slowly applause began, first from the bleachers, then spreading louder until even officers who doubted clapped. Harmon didn't join them, but his eyes lingered, and for the first time they carried no smirk, only thought. That night, as dusk bled across the training field, walked the grounds again, recruits drilling under fading light, voices calling cadence, the sound of scars being turned into steel. She stopped at the edge, her hand brushing the worn photograph she always carried, her father's smile staring back, her 8-year-old self beside him, too small to understand yet what sacrifice meant. "They called me broken," she whispered into the wind. "But they were wrong. We're not broken, we're forged." And as the stars lit above, she knew the truth. The movement had begun. No one could stop it now. What happens when the fight you thought was yours alone becomes a movement? You learn that legacy isn't chosen, it's built, step by painful step. Months passed and the ripples became waves. What began as one adaptive unit at Fort Jackson grew into a network. 3 new bases adopted the model. Applications poured in: amputees, burned survivors, soldiers with traumatic stress, men and women who'd been told they were finished. And they came not to be, but to prove. The numbers were undeniable. Simulation after simulation, deployment after deployment, the data came back the same. Adaptive soldiers weren't liabilities. They were innovators. They outperformed in scenarios where doctrine cracked, where textbook precision failed, where chaos ruled. It was no longer an experiment, it was doctrine. Was promoted to major. The orders came crisp and clean. She would serve as Pentagon liaison for adaptive warfare programs, overseeing expansion across all branches. The night before her departure, she walked the training grounds one last time. Her recruits know her soldiers were drilling under the evening sky, calling cadence, his prosthetic striking the ground in rhythm. Winter leading stress inoculation exercises, her once shaking voice now sharp and commanding. Teaching terrain navigation to a fresh class, her movements balanced and certain. Daniels running alongside them, his voice carrying across the field with the weight of a man who had once doubted, now converted fully. The sight tightened her chest. This wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to all of them. She stopped at the memorial wall, her father's name carved deep. The stone was cold beneath her palm. Lowry found her there as he always seemed to. "The transport's ready," he said gently. "I was just saying goodbye." "You're not leaving it behind," Lowry replied. "You're making sure it lasts. Different mission, same purpose." Her eyes lingered on her father's name. The most important battles aren't won with superior force, but with superior adaptation. His words, words she had lived, carved into her very body. She nodded. "Then it's time." The next morning, she boarded the transport. As the aircraft lifted, she watched the training grounds fall away, soldiers running, shouting, living proof that broken never meant finished. Washington was another battlefield. Briefings, committees, endless discussions with officials who wanted metrics, percentages, guarantees. But slowly, even there, minds shifted. The doctrine spread. Adaptive combat training wasn't just for the wounded anymore. Elements began to bleed into conventional units. Because if adaptation worked it worked for everyone. The army was changing, but not without resistance. One afternoon in a Pentagon corridor, she found herself face to face with General Harmon. His eyes were still hard, but something in his stance had shifted. Less defiance, more weight. "Major," he said formally. "General." He studied her for a long moment. "I opposed your program, you know that." "I do. I believed I was protecting standards. That compromise weakened the force." He exhaled, slow. "But I've seen the results. I was wrong." Her chest tightened, not with triumph, with something deeper, recognition of the cost of being right. "I spent decades discarding soldiers who didn't fit the mold," Harmon admitted, voice lower now. "I wonder how many I condemned when they could have been forged into something stronger. That will be my legacy, misjudging men and women who deserved better." She shook her head gently. "Your legacy isn't over, General. You can still shape it. Help us train the next generation. Teach them what tradition gave you and what it blinded you to. Both matter." For the first time, Harmon's face softened, not into a smile, but into something like relief. "You sound like your father," he said. Her throat burned. "So I've been told." The months became a year. The Adaptive Combat Training Center at Fort Jackson grew into a network of facilities. Instructors, once trainees themselves, carried forward her methods. Winter, now Sergeant Winter, taught stress control to entire companies. Promoted designed mobility drills for special operations candidates. Daniels, now Major himself, lessons into doctrine. Lowry, elevated to Colonel, oversaw the medical arm of the program. And she became less visible on the ground, more present in policy rooms, her limp echoing in marble halls where change was written in ink instead of sweat. Yet she carried both worlds inside her. The mud of valor ridged still on her boots, the scars of Kandahar still on her skin. One evening, after another long day of briefings, she stood before a new class of instructors at Fort Benning. They watched her, some skeptical, some inspired, all waiting for proof that the words in the manuals came from somewhere real. She didn't begin with doctrine or statistics. She began with a truth. 6 months ago, I stood on a training field where no one believed in me. They called me broken. They bet on my failure. They saw a limp and assumed weakness. She paused, her gaze swept the room. But weakness wasn't what they saw. What they saw was the cost of survival, and survival is not weakness. It is the foundation of strength. Silence filled the room, the kind that carried weight. "We don't serve despite our scars," she said. "We serve with greater effectiveness because of them. The soldier who has never failed, never adapted, never endured pain, that is the soldier most vulnerable on the battlefield. Because combat doesn't reward perfection, it rewards resilience." Her voice dropped softer, reflective, and resilience comes from the fire. Later, alone in her quarters, she unfolded the photograph she still carried. Her father's smile, her younger self, the reminder of where this began. She traced the worn edges, and for a moment allowed herself to breathe. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, step after step, scar after scar, until the world has no choice but to see. And that was her story, the story of every soldier they had called broken. No longer an insult, no longer a dismissal. Broken had become a badge. And in the silence of her room, she finally allowed herself to whisper the truth aloud. "They called me broken on day one, but broken was just the beginning.